Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and glad to help you on your journey towards senior leadership in the charitable sector. Thanks as always for listening. If you are a current or perhaps aspiring nonprofit leader, you're in the right place. I'm glad to bring you these weekly conversations with nonprofit leaders who are on the cutting edge of our sector. And if you would, do me a favor, share this episode with one other person so that we can continue to build a global community focused on nonprofit leadership. Well, I had a fantastic conversation in this episode with Marc Pitman, who brings 3 decades of experience in nonprofit leadership, fundraising, consulting, and coaching. And he's the perfect person to listen to if you're contemplating where you are on your nonprofit leadership journey right now. Let's face it, folks, this is hard work, and we all have those feelings of insecurity and doubt even if we are in the senior position with a nonprofit organization. Well, Marc has written the perfect book for those of you contemplating exactly that and perhaps dealing with leadership challenges, and it's called The Surprising Gift of Doubt. It's chock full of practical advice to enhance your leadership journey right now. And I know after listening to Marc in this episode, you're going to want to get a copy of the book and learn more about what it can do to impact and improve your experience as a nonprofit leader. Don't forget to check out the show notes. This is episode number 125. Just go to the podcast or the news page at pattonmcdowell.com, and you'll find out all of the resources Marc and I discuss, as well as more information on him and the great work he's doing through the Concord Leadership Group, and of course, where you can find out more about getting a copy of the book. Speaking of resources, while you're on our website, make sure you connect with us. We're on all the primary social media platforms, LinkedIn in particular, and reach out to us. Make sure you're on our mailing list so you can get our weekly emails, including episodes just like this, and schedule some time to talk with us. I'd be happy to talk to you about your nonprofit organization and what we could do to help its strategic planning, board development, or maybe some of its fundraising practices. And of course, I'd love to talk to you about your personal leadership journey in the nonprofit sector. Well, let's talk about a coaching arrangement, training, or perhaps you'd be interested in one of our unique mastermind programs. We've got 2 groups going right now this fall and have open registration for the spring of 2022. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Marc Pitman. Marc, thank you for joining me on the path.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm excited about this conversation. Marc, you have written another fantastic book that I know will appeal to our nonprofit leader listeners. They're all wrestling with leadership, perhaps more than ever in this strange pandemic time in which we live. And you have a compelling hook literally in your book title. So tell us that answer first. Why do you think doubt is a gift for nonprofit leaders?
Well, nonprofit leadership is one of the hardest gigs on the planet, I think. In a traditional, most of our board members think you're the boss, you have a staff, you service clients, that drives the revenue, and there's a kind of symmetry to that. But nonprofit leaders, the minute you become the CEO or an executive director of a nonprofit, you give up being the boss. Because you have a board that oversees that. So you're caught in the middle of your board, who sometimes thinks that they're all individuals instead of a board is a cohesive thing. They all think they're your boss. Then you've got your staff still. But no matter how well all of you work together to serve your clients or your mission, that doesn't drive the revenue. You have this other group called donors. So the whole model of nonprofit leadership is rife for doubt.
Yep.
And I think many go through thinking that I know because the research that I've done, many feel like they're in the wrong spot, that they're totally they don't have what it takes to be the leader that the organization needs. And that doubt could be that. It could be that, yeah, you should consider moving over or moving out. But I firmly believe that the doubt can also be an invitation. It can be a tell that you're on the verge of greatness. That it can be shifting from what am I lacking? Why don't I get it right? To I keep missing these parts. What if that's my unique contribution to this organization? What if this is our organization is the right voice that the sector needs in this conversation?
Love the way you articulate that, both the complexity of nonprofit leadership, which I think some outside our sector maybe oversimplify.
Sure.
And you made very clear that there is a complexity. And I love also that you lift up that doubt, which sometimes maybe paralyzes nonprofit leaders into inactivity. You're suggesting there's opportunity here. And I wonder, Marc, is that what you really enjoy in working with the nonprofit sector? Talk about that. You've done great work
so
throughout
much. I do. Yeah. So I'm a leadership guy that has loved, I think I was surprised by how powerful coaching could be in my own life. In people that didn't know my area of expertise, which happened to be fundraising, they didn't know that, but they made me a better me. And then I could figure out how to be a better fundraiser in that. So with the nonprofit leadership, I think with any leadership, no matter how high you go, the higher you go, the less supervision in some ways you get, but the more risky your decisions are. You're given more permission to make bigger impact with decisions, and there's no longer that person kind of telling you exactly what the decision, how it should be taken out. There's some leeway that you're given. And that becomes really scary because you don't want to get fired and you don't want to hurt the staff or the mission or the board. So I love working with the people in that space because in part, we get the best people in the nonprofit sector.
Yes.
I mean, the people that run nonprofits, there's not really anybody that I run into that wakes up in the morning thinking, how can I be an incomplete jerk today? Exactly. How can I mess up somebody's life?
You don't see that.
Yeah, no, people want to do good. They want to fix problems. They want to, the organizational structure of fixing problems and doing good is something that kind of blindsides a lot of people because they see the problem, the mission, and they forget about caring for the team. But we have some of the best people. So that's why I love working with them.
Well, and you alluded to the fact that, and I think you would agree, Marc, as we climb the ladder in nonprofit organizations, it becomes a lonely perch, doesn't it? And is that where you see the real impact and value of your coaching? Because they literally don't have anyone to talk to.
Absolutely. I got to do here in South Carolina, I got to do a panel with executive directors that were 3 to 5 years into their position. I thought I was asking a lot. We packed out the room. It was standing room only. People really wanted to know what the executive directors were thinking. And I thought I ended it with a very kind of soft question. You know how you do that in a panel? Just kind of have a happy, warm, feel-good question. I missed. My happy, warm, feel-good question was turned to everybody and said, so you guys are 3 to 5 years into this. At what point did you start sleeping through the night? Yeah, none of them, each of them started looking at each other saying,
I'm not there yet.
I don't sleep through the night. Because there's payroll, there's all these things. So the privilege of coaching is that I'm outside of the hiring and firing space, and I become that person where they can let the mask down. It's okay for them to not know. And unfortunately, I don't know if you've noticed this, but our boards, and if we figure this out, we're going to save a lot of people's lives. But our boards hire the best people for the CEO role, the executive director role. And as an aside, I always call the executive director a CEO because boards understand CEOs. Executive directors sound like administrative assistant to the board.
Good point.
Often, no offense for the title, but I just try to speak the dialect of the board.
Absolutely.
So they hire the best CEO and then they start doubting him right away. Or thinking that they don't have a full-time job already. And so they add all these other things. So it's a real privilege to be able to be in that safe space and to be the voice of reason sometimes of, that's actually something you do need to change, but also to be the place of, one of the hardest questions I ask clients is, so how are you going to celebrate that? We just had somebody that made her first $3 million ask of a donor, got $1 million pledged, committed in the meeting, which was a huge win for this organization. Exactly. 5 hours later, she was CC'd on an email transferring all the stock. So not only did it get pledged verbally, the gift was made all in the same day. And so I said, have you ever had this happen? No, I've never had this happen. How do you celebrate? Silence. Yeah.
She hadn't thought about that, had she?
Well, no, because there was always more to do. And the people that that don't get the fundraising aspect of running a nonprofit just felt like that's what you do. That's that's just normal. So to be that person that's able to say, let's just take a moment and then frame something. She actually was smart enough to take something she was already going to do, but she just allowed herself to feel the joy of receiving somebody else's generosity and plugging them in that way.
That's well put. And it leads to my question about, are there other challenges that you've seen nonprofit leaders having to face, perhaps surprising to your panel description? I'm sure they thought, when am I going to hit a point where I can sleep through the night? And is that among the things that you see nonprofit leaders in particular are challenged by, especially these days?
Yes, definitely. I'm laughing because I had a mentor that told me that the view is different from the captain's chair. So the minute you get into the head spot, you realize, wow, all those people that were idiots before me may not have been idiots. There's a lot of things to think about.
Yes, indeed.
There's employee mentality and owner mentality. So the employee mentality is, well, just spend more budget, just pay for more stuff. Give me the raise without any merit verification. But then when you start having to see how the revenue comes in and the expenses, that gets really stressful. So there's
good point.
Just the organizational leadership structure of any organization is that meeting payroll becomes almost can become tunnel visioning, because you start not seeing how it's going to happen, and you don't have accounts receivable like a business might have or a hospital might have in some of their forms. So there's that. There's two other. Can I give you two more?
Please do.
Okay. One of them is all the stuff that got you to the point of being promoted doesn't help you anymore.
Interesting.
So Jamie Smith, who was with YNPN for a long time as executive director, I heard her first articulate it this way. She said, you get technical skills, you get hired for technical skills. And if you do those well, you get promoted into a management position and you realize, man, my technical skills they're not enough. I need to actually get along with people. So you learn people skills, but then you get promoted into an executive director position. And all of a sudden, if you do the technical skills, you're micromanaging, because even if there's only a small staff, you're supposed to trust them to get the work done, even if they're doing it wrong or not the way you would. They're not doing it wrong. It's just different, but it feels wrong. And the people skills, they're not really looking for another good friend. They're looking for someone who's casting a vision, as is the board. So there are these vision skills, and the carving the space to reflect and to plan feels like cheating, and delegating feels like cheating, because everything in our life, from school to athletic fields to early jobs, our report card is what we have actually produced and gotten done, as opposed to what we've helped others produce and get done. So that's the second one. The third one that is particularly, I'm glad it's happening. I wish we had a fix for this, is that there's a great, wonderful reckoning with equity, and especially in North America.
Indeed.
And it's so exciting that we get to be alive during these conversations. It's also incredibly frustrating that it's taken this long. And so one of the issues that I'm seeing across nonprofits right now is there's a Sean Edwards at the Citadel in South Carolina articulated a diversity and inclusion framework from somebody else that had 5 stages in it. The last 2 are change agent and fighter. So I see a lot of change. So the change agents know there's an issue and they're trying to change and make things equitable. The fighters tend to be singular issue. They just see racism, or just see misogyny, or just see pay inequity, or just see one thing, and they don't see how they all kind of come together and overlap. And what I'm seeing in nonprofits, especially from the CEO level, is the CEO that gets it, that wants to make a change and wants to have an impact, is getting whiplashed by staff that are fighter. They have the fighter mentality of the one issue,
yes,
or the burn it all down mentality, which we need that voice in the conversation because it pushes the rest of the conversation. So I think it's really healthy to have people that are that. I don't know how we understand this, cisgender white guy right here. So I know that I'm also coming from a very viewpoint that's been crafted for me over centuries. But in saying that, I think that there's a way that we can do the change without risking people's jobs, risking the jobs of the very staff members that are saying burn it all down. Because if there's no structure, if there's no board, if there's no paychecks, then there's no the people that we're serving, the mission that we're serving, the history that we're preserving is now at risk and bereft. And yes, people will rise up out of that. We always do. Humans are really good at helping each other and making change. I'm just seeing, so I don't have a prescription for this, but I'm seeing CEOs and boards that are getting people that are wanting to push the issue further, but not do it in a way that understands that they're part of a team called this nonprofit. And it's so divisive that that's keeping a lot of CEOs that really want to do the right thing up at night. And we don't all have it all together. I know that, but it's an issue that I'm seeing that's really in this time challenging.
Well, and great examples, Mark, of your earlier point that what got us here may not carry us forward. So nonprofit leaders indeed are struggling with this increased complexity of issues of DEI that thankfully are more on the forefront. But wow, I don't even know how to approach it if I'm a nonprofit leader. And in fact, in your book, you make a fascinating statement about how most of us learn leadership. And you talk about that. And I wonder if you could speak to it here, because maybe it will reassure nonprofit leaders that, hey, there are still tools that can help you, but aren't most of us based our leadership on kind of how we grew up in it and not necessarily what we need to know going forward?
Well, and it's not the truth. So the way that most of us get when we start a leadership position, whether it's just leading a project at school or leading a team or something, is we just copy the people that are around that we've seen doing it.
Exactly.
Which is totally normal. Oh, that person did it. That person said jump and we all said how high. So I must just have to say jump and people will say how high. But so we start out with either the confidence in our own ability or confidence in the other person's saying that we have something to offer. And then we end up not having the same experience. So I jokingly say that I grew up listening to a lot of motivational speakers, and they'd say, if you're leading and you turn around and there's no one following you, you're just out for a walk.
Exactly.
And that takes a hit on our leadership and our confidence, because they're thinking, oh no, it worked for this person. And that's where that kind of what is my deficit, which we get from grades too. What's lacking, what's missing. A lot of performance reviews are still, you're strong on those things, so we're going to write those off. You need to work on these weaknesses. And so we're scripted this way. And that, as our confidence goes down, we start doing what we just know to do, is look outside ourselves for answers, because we've been told that the emotions are woo-woo and soft and get data. What's the data on this? Don't trust your gut. And it's not all bad to get data. I think it's very good to get data for fundraising in particular. Most of the good fundraising things that work, and we can have a discussion about whether they're equitable or not. And I think there's a way to marry the equity with the things that work, but it's basically speaking the dialect to somebody else instead of speaking your own dialect. You have to learn to talk a language that somebody else understands so that you can have a conversation. And so the data we need in the experiment stage I have 4 quadrants. So that's quadrant 2. So the data is good, but it often, when we're looking for what's broken in us, most systems and formulas don't fit us all. So we learn time management, and we only get like 10% of the book said everything changes. This changed my world. My life is so much better. My inbox is 0, and people are giving me all these awards, and I'm sipping drinks with little umbrellas because my life is so good. And our life isn't that good, and we're not seeing it as natural. So we just kind of work through that and kind of bump around in that area of feeling like, okay, so I'm failing at this. Let's find the next fix. Let's find the next certification. Let's find the next program. Let's find the next whatever. And I see organizations do this too. Some leaders that are flailing will end up, I said flailing. It's not always flailing. It's really, it can be motivated to look for to fix what's wrong.
Right.
But there are some of us, the hospital I worked at, we did this with management programs. We'd have fish sticks for a few years, and then we'd learn some other management in a box kit and have the balloon drop and the t-shirts and the new lingo. And it helped to an extent, but it kept us kind of lurching like this weird Frankenstein.
Still wasn't right.
Yeah, because it wasn't us. It was parts of us. Parts of it resonated with us, but it wasn't ours. It was somebody else's that we were trying to fit into.
Well, you make that point very well, that I think we all crave that external system that'll just solve all our problems, right? And we'll bring it in and just import it. And in fact, you say, Mark, we're looking in the wrong direction.
Well, have you gotten any RFP requests lately for strategic plans?
Oh yeah.
Oh, bless our hearts. It's like could you just take a minute and read what you just submitted?
Literally
You just
what
asked
you
people
said.
to give. Yeah, because it's sort of like, I want to know exactly what the population growth in our community is going to be in the next 5 years. And I want to know what my donation growth is going to be, where to find that, where to find how to tap into the millennials and the Z and the other younger people, as well as, I mean, it's like, I want everything explained for me so I can just operationally live it out, which any one of us that's lived through the pandemic knows that could change in an instant. That could be thrown out the window. So yeah, I think the where that doubt, that kind of that feeling of I don't fit, could lead us into the other half, what I call the other half of the leadership map.
Yep.
That's pushing us to look at the internal inputs, not just the external, not excusing the external or writing them off, but honoring the kind of, why do I get all tied up in knots when I'm thinking about this? Oh, maybe it's fundraising has been a large part of my background. So let me just use a fundraising example.
Sure.
Maybe it's because when the board asks me to ask this person, they're asking me to ask this person in a kind of white savior mentality instead of in an equitable mentality. Maybe it's because they're saying, they say, I need to go to them as the do-gooder, the all-powerful, helping the poor slobs that can't help themselves. So maybe the fact that it's not resonating with my gut is because that's actually not good. Maybe we need to
trust your gut there, right?
Yeah, trust your gut. So fortunately, Patton, there's a lot of different things that we can do, and some of them are quadrant 2, the experiment things, but there's a way to work with ourselves individually and or with our team to figure out, to develop that vocabulary of, you know what, this is why we're not going to do this. And this, thank you so much. It's sort of like when a board member says, well, you should have a bake sale. Well, thank you. I appreciate that you want to raise funding for the organization. And I've been around enough improv people
not
to
a bake
say,
sale.
and not, but yeah. And we have found that a better way to do fundraising is,
Mark, before we go too much further,
go for it.
You've touched on the quadrants. Why don't you give us a walk through your quadrant system, which again is lifted up very well in the book, but maybe you could give us a summary.
Absolutely.
Because that does apply to a lot of things we're talking about.
So if you're not driving, take out a pen and a piece of paper and have a vertical line. You're going to do a 4-quadrant sort of model. The vertical line is your confidence quadrant or confidence axis, and the horizontal line is your inputs axis.
Yep.
On the top is the right confidence, and the bottom right unsure. On the left of the inputs model, put external, and on the right put internal. And you've got the 4 quadrant scheme there. So the first quadrant is the upper left-hand quadrant, which is the observe quadrant. Your high confidence, looking externally, copying people. That confidence drifts down to quadrant 2, which is the experiment quadrant, where you're starting to look for what's broken. And it's good to learn quadrant 1. It's really good to learn who's safe to follow. And we need to follow people. That is a smart thing to do. Quadrant 2, it's really good to learn how we learn. So that's a good quadrant to be in. And it seems to be a necessary part of growth. Quadrant 3 is where you cross that vertical axis and you move into the internal inputs, and you start exploring things like your hardwiring, your personality, the stories you tell yourself, the stories your organization tells itself, the way you set goals, the values, your personal values, your organizational values. And as you do that, you start building up confidence again of, oh, maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I'm doing things in a different way, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong way. And that causes your confidence to go back up. So you're in the quadrant 4, which I call the focus quadrant. And I don't want listeners to think it's not like a nirvana, like, ooh, everything's blissful and peaceful. Because
here, right?
Yeah, we're still human beings. We're a human being, and we still work with human beings on planet Earth. So it's not going to be perfect. But the focus comes in with, you have a much more complete view of the terrain. You see the whole map, not just the externals, and you can figure out, do I need to copy someone? Do I need to find a course to take, or a curriculum to take, or a degree? Do I need to go inwards and start having a conversation with my team? Hey, we always tend to respond this way when that happens. What is that? What could that be telling us?
Yep.
Yeah. And so that's where the confidence comes in of, we have a vocabulary, and we're able to explain it in ways that makes sense. I mean, trusting our gut shouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but that usually won't get past the board. So being able to explain, or staff, Yeah. I mean, a lot of staff, if you're the type of leader that staff will unquestionably follow you because you trust your gut, it's usually a charismatic leader, and that has shown to have great loyalty, but also real ethical, a very dark shadow, because people will take risks without even questioning it.
Indeed.
And that could be very bad.
But you're saying, again, many, if not most, don't cross that confidence line of being externally focused. And is that, in essence, really the gist of the book, or among the reasons you wrote
so the book came out of, I tried to figure out where are people at when, like, my first question was, how do I work with people? Because I could never explain coaching.
I was going to get you to do that too.
Okay, great.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I've been coached since 95. I had,
right.
So I've had a lot of coaching in my background. I've been honored that way to be able to do that. And then I've been a coach, but people would ask me, what do you do? I'd say, I'm an executive coach. And they'd say, okay. And then they drift back to me. So
what does that mean?
It's like anybody that works from home, their parents don't think they have a job.
Exactly.
So you can do all you can run my errands for me, can't you? So what I found was that most of the people that are doing the work that I enjoy doing is the people that are doing that wrestling within themselves, and I wanted to call it Finchley leaders because of the Chronicles of Narnia Disney movie. If you know the Chronicles of Narnia, it's Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the brothers and sisters are talking to the beavers, and the beavers are seeing the brothers and sisters as this fulfillment of prophecy. And you're the kings and queens of Narnia. And the kids look at each other and say, no, we're not. We're from Finchley.
Yeah.
And those are the type of leaders I love being with, because those are the leaders that they have a very real grasp of who they are and their limitations, but they're willing to grow into the royalty. If you know the story, they become the royalty in Narnia.
Literally. Yep.
Literally. Right. So those are the leaders I like, but then I had to figure out, okay, that's the space, but where are they on their journey? And so that's where the 4 quadrants came out of, because there's a path to get to that place. And many of us, many people can have entirely successful external success, and maybe even internal, staying on the external part of the map without ever crossing over into the questioning, because it really, a lot of Western society has made it unsafe up until just recently to actually start thinking about the internal things as a real place of getting data from.
Is much of your coaching, Mark, based in that, in terms of that internal external divide? Do you find that a lot of that is you're bringing that kind of perspective out?
I don't put that on people, because coaching is very much drawing out of others, but that's the lens that I'm looking through, is sort of, okay. And what I love about it is it's not, with coaching, it's not a formula. It's not like in a consulting gig, I have a plan to go through. If I'm doing a capital campaign feasibility study, there's an order to the process that we are not going to deviate from. In coaching, though, I can look to see where would be the natural on-ramp for this person. Have they already done some personality assessments, or are they questioning their values? Maybe a values, for a lot of people, just trying to figure out what your core values are.
Yes.
With the values inventory. Time. I remember when I did it for the first time 15 years ago, and independence was one of the core values that I had. And it really helped me to realize that is not what everybody else sees. And if I'm going to be in a bureaucratic setting, I need to make a conscious choice that I'm going to probably be stressed. And so is that worth the stress? Because my independence, that's why I love major gifts, because I get to be out of the office.
Exactly.
Thinking thinking in the moment. So if they did a values assessment, they could also then figure out what's my organizational core values. I did this with an AFP group, and they couldn't figure it out. I also nonprofit storytelling conference group. I've done it twice. And a lot of people were freaked out that they couldn't figure out.
They just couldn't do it.
Their organizational, no, they could do their own, fine.
But the organization
really didn't know what their organization stood for. And that gave them great
tells
pause.
You something.
Right. And also could tell you something. The other thing that you can tell is, if you know it, to see if there's a split. A lot of stress comes in those values that are just in conflict or haven't been examined. And so you get to choose then. Is this a conflict I want to have? But in the nonprofit space, I think that's even, people are more open to that. They just aren't, it's not something you think of, but if you Google values inventory, you'll find a billion.
That's a good way exercise to play with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Then, yeah. So there are good books on that too.
All right. Well, let me ask you this, Mark. If a nonprofit leader, I've never experienced coaching, and I know it varies, but maybe you could speak to the frequency and duration of a coaching relationship, or are there kind of a range you might share for someone who has simply never done it?
Yeah. One of my first questions when I'm exploring coaching with someone is, have you been professionally coached?
Right.
Because a lot of us have a very similar model. So it's usually a set number of calls, and it varies. So my offerings are either every other week, because weekly, just 7 days comes really fast.
That's a quick turnaround. Right.
I used to pastor a church. And so every sermon, every 7 days, like, wow, were we just here? So I like the every other week, but some people like weekly. And I find also, depending on what you're dealing with, sometimes weekly is the right way. So, but they're regularly set scheduled calls so that you have it on your calendar. And many coaches that's what they do. You talk to them during those calls and that's it. For myself and I don't know if there are others that do this too, but I find the leadership happens in between the calls.
Yeah, good.
So I like to have access to texting or calls. I give people my cell phone. And then there's another offering that is less known, but that I do is some people they don't feel like they need to have a schedule.
Yeah.
Of calls. And those are some of the more high performing leaders, but they want access. So that's another level of coaching. But basic executive coaching is scheduled calls, 45 minutes, 55 minutes. They talk about whatever you want to talk about, but their coach's job is to hold the kind of, as a meta narrative, the original reason that you got into coaching or you came. Usually people have a presenting problem.
Yeah.
My staff is staff employment satisfaction is really low and I need to fix that. Or my fundraising is really low and I need to fix that. Or we have a lot of turnover. And so there's something to fix. And so the coach balances this wonderful space, holds the space for having that conversation happen, as well as allowing the coach to be there in the moment, the
Nice.
client to be there in the moment. And, many calls will be like, look, this is what we assign. At the end of every call, I say, what do you want me to ask you about next call?
Yeah, good.
And they tell me so I can hold them accountable. But, I said, this is what then if you and I were talking again, it would be, so this is what we talked about. We're going to talk about this call, but before we do that, has anything happened? And
we might need to talk about it instead.
Space. Yeah. Life happens in between those calls. And so, could be somebody that just, what I love about coaching, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, is it doesn't have to stay job related. It's person related. And it's really about coming.
Sometimes more so, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where I think one of the biggest things that we forget in work, and there's reasons for this, but I'm glad that millennials and Z particularly are not willing to put up with this anymore, but we forget that we are human beings. And so we think we can just be a machine and just show up at the office, punch a card, do work, and then leave, without the fact that we're living through a pandemic or that a close relative just passed away or something else happening. And there's that tension of, you got a job to do, so do it. But there's also that tension of being human, and coaching holds a space for that. So we can just go where the coaching client needs it to go because it's confidential. So.
Yeah, and what a relief that is for your coaching client, because they may not get that elsewhere.
And literally. It's not always safe to. Even sometimes there are certain things that you're stressed about that your spouse just can't help you anymore.
Even your own family
can't really help you. Yeah,
right.
They've tried, and it's just nice to have someplace else to go. So,
in terms of the duration, Mark, do you and your coaching clients kind of evaluate at the 6-month mark? And because I'm sure some go on for years, others maybe you decide mutually to part. How does that work?
That's it. Yeah. So for me personally, I started out with 3 and 6 months packages, but I found around 3 months, the honeymoon's over, and people realize that they have to start working, because the coaching is all about them making the change that they can stay with.
Yes.
Not the coach doing it for them. So I do offer 6 and 12 months because I want to have the easy off ramp that we need to reevaluate. And coaching is, as I've been trained, and as I train coaches, coaching is never meant to be about renewing the contract. It's about helping the person get through a patch and be successful on their own terms. And so I love having that kind of very standard agreement of a 6-month or 12-month check-in, and people can totally re-up. That's totally acceptable. But it gives both of us the space to be able to say, I don't know if this is the right thing for you, or I think this really is.
The milestones set in advance, right? So
and I don't know. Yeah. So the milestones are important. The other part I love about coaching, and I think this is standard with other coaches, is that the calls are the clients to direct. So if they want to, I had a CEO of a tech startup. we were talking about marketing, and he didn't like what I was saying about marketing, or he liked what I was saying, but his marketing person didn't. So he said, "Hey, look, I got Joel on the line. Can I just bring him into this conversation?" And so the call became hashing out how marketing should be. Like, you actually do have to make a sale, or for fundraisers would be, you actually have to ask.
Gotta go ask. Yep.
Yeah. It's not just educating people. You actually have to call them to action. But the CEO had the freedom to do that because it was his call to direct. So
good, and good for you for adapting to the need, literally, of that client.
Well, that's
right?
what I'm sure you're like this too. I love serving people, and the need of the client is, that's what,
how you want to help.
Yeah.
Marc, I want to tease our listeners with some concepts from your book.
Okay.
That you can maybe give them a little more information. You make, in fact, I think a whole chapter around learning the stories that serve us. What do you mean by that? Or maybe you can give us a little more of a teaser to that concept.
One of the things that I've had the privilege of doing because of running the nonprofit storytelling conference for now 8 years, I guess, is really doing deep dives into the study of narrative and story.
Yep.
So if your cell phone, if you have a cell phone in front of you as you're listening to this, you can pick it up and look at it. It's either probably Apple iOS operating system or the Android operating system. You may still have a BlackBerry. I know some people do. Human beings, the operating system is story. Because we are such pattern-seeking species, we see data and we try to connect it with story. But we don't often, in my experience, we don't often reflect on those stories that we're telling ourselves. Just had an experience last week where something really awful happened. It was happening in my computer. It was just not going right. It was taking a lot longer than it was supposed to. And then work from home. So I went out and started doing something, putting the dishes away. And one of them almost dropped and fell. And I heard my thought go, "Oh, it's just that kind of day." And it was like a story I was telling myself.
There's a story.
Agreement I was making with, and fortunately I've been trying to train myself since I was a teenager. So I felt that thought come through and I was like, yeah, that doesn't need to land in this tree. No, it's just another event. I tried not to make that agreement. So with leaders, it's often, there's a couple ways we do it. One easy way to think about it is, what are the ways that you introduce yourself to new people? How do you position yourself? What are the phrases you use about yourself to help them identify where in their kind of cubicle or their hat racks that they're going to place you? And so that if you just start writing them down, that can become really important. I remember doing this I didn't know I was doing this in college, but my roommate, and I think I put this in the book, my roommate looked at, I was trying to impress this really, really cool woman who's now my wife of 27 years, which is great. So
it works. Yeah.
It worked, but I was trying to impress her. And my roommate rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, if you stick around him long, you'll hear that story a lot. It's one of his stock stories." And we have stock stories that we tell people because we know they'll get a laugh or to get a tear or get whatever. Those aren't bad, but if we look at them, flying out to the nonprofit storytelling conference one year, I started realizing I should probably list them. And over the course of a couple of weeks, I came up with 600 story prompts that were kind of stock stories that I tell myself, or pull out of my toolkit to share at different times. So that's one. The other one is what I love. Jess Sharp here in Greenville, South Carolina. She has her clients list their self-talk out, the thoughts that are going through their head throughout the day. She has them take out a legal pad of paper and just write down what kind of judgmental thoughts or self-talk. Yes. Okay. And whether it's for a day, a week, whatever, trying to non-judgmentally just record it honestly. And then at the end of that time, take the paper out and look at it and ask yourself this question. Would I talk to a friend like this? Oftentimes we're so negative to ourselves. We're incredibly more toxic than we would be with a friend. And so her invitation, and I love this, is to maybe start trying to treat yourself as well as you would a friend. And so for anybody that's listening,
tactic,
those stories, because those are stories we're telling ourselves too. So if anybody that's listening that has a boss, which probably is a lot, and self-employed people in particular, because many of us work for people that are really mean ourselves. But thinking, just if your boss is acting really weirdly, they may have deficits that need addressing, but they may also just be incredibly harsher on themselves than you even know. So part of what I love about coaching and in quadrant 3, as I call it, is it builds empathy for others to see the world from different perspectives. We have a way of seeing the world, and it is a very good thing. And it's very okay that there are other ways of seeing the world, like the Enneagram, which is a 9 typology thing. There are 9 different stories people are telling themselves to motivate through the world. And once you start understanding that, whether the Enneagram is your cup of tea or not, it helps you to just expand that grace and some empathy of, I don't agree with
understanding, right, for
but
others.
I don't have to write them off necessarily entirely. Yeah.
It's excellent. And I'm struck by that point that we often make a case for support for our organization, but perhaps we don't make a good case for support for ourselves.
Ooh.
Right. That we have this almost apologetic or toxic. And so, Marc, you just hit me with, shouldn't we have a case for support for ourselves?
You should get that domain name, caseforsupportforyourself.com.
We've talked about that in our mastermind group. And in fact, because we go around the room and everyone has these beautiful, uplifting, encouraging cases of support for their organization, but yet they're more self-deprecating, apologetic, or even, more negative about themselves. And so I just am struck by your point that let's work on our narrative and make it more positive.
That is excellent. Wow.
Well, you've got a lot of excellent stuff. I'm not going to even get down my whole list, Marc, because the book, in fact, let me give you this opportunity though. Multiple topics you cover on planning, strategic planning, goal setting. One, if I could focus your attention on, was you suggest that many of us are kind of daily planners, but you, if I'm not incorrect, think that maybe we need to step back, and maybe you could speak to that as a personal organizational kind of tactic.
Yeah, I grew up in a family that was listening to a lot of goal setting speakers and reading a lot of goal setting books. So one of the things that I learned early on, and I learned this from one of the better communicators of it was Stephen Covey, and the Merrills, Roger Merrill. They had a quadrant 2 time management.
Okay. Yep.
But what happens when you just focus on the day, you kind of look through your emails and you have your tasks, and you it's not bad. It's better than not focusing at all, but you tend to focus on the priorities. What are the fires that I need to put out now? What are the moles whack-a-mole? What are the moles I need to whack right now? And you tend to see yourself you don't get the full picture of yourself. So when you start looking at the week, you can start blocking times for different things that are important to you. And you know that you may be a little out of balance on certain days, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person. So if you're a parent, let's say, and your kid has a PTO meeting or parent teacher conference, you might need to leave a little early one day, but you can plan in for that, especially if your work environment allows for that, to compensate at another time if you look at a week. And so you can realize over the course of a week, I'm taking care of I am taking care of the things that I want to take care of. What I love about weekly planning, the way that I learned it and the way I share in the book and work with clients, is also looking at all the roles in your life. One of the reasons we are often very critical of ourselves is because we're not realizing how good we are doing with some of our relationship deposits in the bank account. I just started doing time tracking. I had a coach inspire me to do time tracking, which I've never wanted to do.
Yeah,
in the 49 and
how is it
3/4 years of my life, I've never wanted to do that.
Right.
But one of the things I noticed is that right around 7:55, I get a couple of minutes every morning, a couple minutes with my youngest. And that has been incredibly affirming, because it would be very easy to, now that they have a driver's license and they're got a job and they're doing all this other stuff, it'd be really easy to say, I never see them. But so it's starting, it allows me to give credit for, that's the me I want to be. I want to be a person I want to be a parent that's in the mix with their kids. And so when you're looking at the week, you can also be intentional. All right, I want to be a community involved person. I don't want to just be a job. I want to have a hobby, or, I want to have whatever is in values to you. You can then just choose 6 or so, including yourself, which the Franklin Covey folks talk about having goals for yourself too every week. And you can put them on your schedule, and it allows you to have peace. It allows you to be present, Patton, so that when you're at work, you don't have to feel like, well, I'm being a bad community member or a bad friend or a bad family member. And when you're being a friend, a family member, a community member, you don't have to feel like I'm being a bad employee because I'm not doing that. It gives you that kind of peace of knowing that you've planned out for the bases are covered.
Love that. Great perspective. And one of many, Marc, that I'm grateful you shared with our listeners. Lots of good advice here. The book clearly is one that we need to all read. And I wonder, Marc, I may add that question to the list of, what is that? I think it was number 8 for you, correct? In terms of the books you have produced. Any final takeaways for you in the process of writing? And does it maybe lead to your next book, which I'm sure is in the back of your head somewhere?
I'm still 6 months out from this book. So, but when I did my book launch, one of my friends, Kate O'Neill, interviewed me and she took the mic. I was interviewing her for my book launch and she turned the mic on me. So I have to go listen to what she said my next book is.
She gave you a good idea.
A very clear idea that was very much birthed out of this one. But I think for wherever you're at, whether emerging leader, volunteer leader, to give yourself a little bit of grace. And most of the people I'm talking to aren't toxic or have, they're really good people that are trying to do good work. And so I think leaving with that, that powerful question of where, if all those places where I'm seeing I'm falling short, what if that just means I'm a square peg in a round hole? Right. Maybe if the fit isn't a bad thing. Maybe it's just maybe the bug is a benefit. Maybe it's a feature, not a bug or defect.
Yes, it's well put. And among many pieces of good advice, Marc, I'm grateful. We're obviously going to lift up the surprising gift of doubt, no doubt, if I can be redundant with that term. But let me ask you, Marc, a question I ask each guest. Has there been a book meaningful to you on your leadership journey, or one you might recommend in addition to yours to our listeners?
Yeah, that's a challenging one because I read 50 to 75 a year, but rarely do I read one twice. And one of the books I've read twice is a book called Coaching for Performance by Sir John Whitmore.
Yep.
I read it during my Franklin Covey executive coach training that I did back in 2003. And he has it's great for leaders. It's not just, even though it's coaching for performance, he speaks both to the person who's a coach, like I am, executive coach.
Yep.
But he also speaks to using this as a coaching, as a management skill, which
every nonprofit leader is, right? Or needs to have.
Every nonprofit leader is. Yeah. So sometimes we're trainers, sometimes we have different roles, but managers, trainers, whatever, but we're also coaches. And that when you get that coaching mentality, it allows you to see the brilliance in the person. And I use the term brilliance a lot, but it's seeing they've got a lot to offer, and it's how do I help them pull that out, and how do I help them see it themselves? And there's a lot of very practical, nitty gritty, like he gives the theory, but he's also done this in companies around the world, and in for me, it was the athletic examples that really stuck out because I am not an athlete, but any sense of it
was a good illustration of his work, right?
Yeah. But there are some things like when you're a tennis pro, instead of asking, what's your wrist doing when you're trying to hit that ball? Because you just missed. So what was your wrist doing? Instead of asking that question, getting them to see further out and say, what pattern were the threads turning in when it came over the net? And they found when they get the person to look a little bit further out, maybe similar to when you move away from just the daily and you move to the weekly, they found that people just
wrist will take care of itself.
Their wrist,
right?
Yeah,
right.
So there's lots of nuggets like that in here, and he's had a profound impact in his on professional coaching and the International Coaching Federation too. So I highly recommend that. Coaching for Performance. It's
fantastic.
In its 5th edition.
Fantastic compliment to your own discussion of coaching, the value of that, and indeed everything
Thanks.
About your book. Marc, where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing?
Well, thank you. Probably Concord Leadership Group, CONCORD Leadership Group is the best place. It's a group of brands. It's Concord Leadership Group is the leadership coaching and the coach certification programs are on. The 2 other places where they can find other aspects of me is fundraisingcoach.com, which it's been one of the longest running fundraising blogs in the sector. And then the Nonprofit Academy is also for smaller budgets. You can get live training and calls with members at that. But if people just want to just connect, Twitter is where I kind of hang out the most. Marc A. Pitman, M-A-R-C A. Pitman. I'm on the other socials too, except Instagram. I just
not ready for that yet.
Well, TikTok, definitely not. My kids tell me
right.
I can't do TikTok.
Yeah, you're off limits
that would
there.
be, they don't want me throwing out a hip or something, but
otherwise we need to find you at Twitter. And
LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. I connect in those places too.
Marc, we'll list it all in the show notes. Delighted to have you, and thank you for joining me on the path. Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Marc as much as I did and came away with some practical ideas that can enhance your personal nonprofit leadership journey in this sector. Marc's got lots of great ideas, and I know you'll benefit from reading more of the things he has written. He has a fantastic and prolific blog in addition to now 8 books he has published. Again, don't forget to check out the show notes. You can find out more about Marc, the Concord Leadership Group, as well by going to the show notes for this episode. It's number 125. As always, please share this episode with someone else on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe. Just go to the podcast page, the new and improved podcast page on our website, patmcdowell.com, and you'll find out more about all of our previous episodes, as well as ways to connect with whatever podcast platform you prefer. Don't miss out on any of our episodes. They come out every Thursday, as well as monthly bonus episodes we're producing right now. Thanks for all you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.